Evening, everyone. We're ready to get started. Today, we're going to be learning Maseches Succah, Daf Zayin, and Daf Ches Amud Aleph. Just unfortunately, there was a bike accident that just took place right here. So we're going to learn tonight as a refuah shlema for this young boy, Shmuel Herschel ben Saraleh. He should have a refuah shlema. So we're going to be starting about 8 or 9 lines down on the top of Zayin Amud Aleph, and we're going to start to discuss different types of sukkahs. This is, of course, what the whole Masechta is about, is what types of sukkahs are kosher and which ones are not. We're going to be contrasting right now 2 sukkahs, one that has our requisite 2 walls, a right angle, and another sukkah where the walls are opposite one another. Let's take a look in the Gemara, 7-8 lines down. Zayin Amud Aleph, Amar Rav Yehuda, Sukkah ha'asuya kemavui kshera. If you have a sukkah that's made like a mavui, like a passageway, so namely there's walls that are parallel to one another, but that's it. And of course, there's going to be a tefach. So then the halach would be it's kosher. But also tefach, what about that third wall, which only needs to be a tefach? The Gemara says, ma'amido l'chol ruach she'yirteh. You can put it at any corner that you want. It's fine. No problem at all. Rav Simon v'item Rav Yoshu ben Levi. Rav Simon, either it was him or Rav Yoshu ben Levi, Amar, oselo pas arba umashehu. No, you can't use regular rules for a mavui. If you have a sukkah that's only made with 2 parallel walls, then that third tefach cannot be a regular tefach. It has to be a pas arba. It has to be a board that is 4 umashehu, 4 plus a little bit. And then uma'amido bepachos mishlosha, and then you have to put it within 3. So it's the wall, the extra chunk of wall is 4 plus. The distance from one of the walls will be just under 3 at the high 2s. And then that's going to be a total of 7, which is the size of a regular wall. And then that would actually work. But the tefach itself is insufficient. You have to make the pas arba, put it pachos mishlosha samach ledofen, and then v'chol pachos mishlosha samach ledofen kilavu dami. He says we have to be a little bit more strict. You need a little bit more of a serious wall when the initial walls that are there are parallel one another and they are not making a right angle. So then if there's a right angle, then we only require the third wall to be a tefach. But if they're parallel to one another and the walls are not connected, then we require more work to be done. And it's this double idea of introducing lavud, of using lavud so that it's less than 3 away, and that piece of wall will be 4 tvachim. That's what we would do in such a case, according to Rav Simon. But the Gemara is bothered by the distinction. Umayshna hasam. Why is it that when we have 2 walls that connect to one another at a corner, they form a corner? There we said to ka'amr sagya tefach shochak. There we said that you can just have the 4th wall be a tefach shochak, which we said is 4 fingers, but none of the fingers are touching one another. So let's say instead of 3 inches, it's 4 inches, whatever. It's a very small wall. Why is it that by when you have a sukkah that it has a right angle of walls, that it's okay to use the tefach shochak? However, umayshna hacha, where the 2 walls in the mavui are opposite one another, there we were more strict. Ka'amres baya pasar ba. Why are we more strict with the mavui, where there's 2 walls that are parallel to one another, opposite and parallel to one another, than when the walls form a right angle? Now the answer would probably pop off the page. Answers the Gemara, because the cases are drastically different. Hasam deikashtei defanot kihil chasam. In the case of the right angle, where your 2 walls meet at a corner, that begins to take shape of a room. It looks like a little bit of a sukkah, a little bit. And therefore, because we have a little bit, therefore, sagi le betefach shochak, therefore, all we need is a little bit of a third wall to indicate that this is in fact a sukkah. But hacha, here in the case of the mavui, and the sukkah that is made like a mavui, in that the walls are opposite one another and they don't meet at a corner, that's the lekashte defanos. That doesn't look like 2 walls, and therefore, iika pasar ba'in. Therefore, if the third wall is made of a board that's 4 plus tvachim and it's put within 3 tvachim of the wall in, that will then be a kosher sukkah ilolo. Okay, a distinction between 2 sukkahs, a wall that is the right angle, 90 degrees, and the 2 walls that are opposite one another, and of course the distinctions therein. Now the Gemara is going to go back now to a 3-way misunderstanding within Rava. We're not sure which one of the following Rava said. To be clear, what Rava was talking about was a case of a right-angled sukkah. So you have 2 walls that meet at a particular corner. Then Rava says the following. Amar Rava, we're just about halfway down on Zayin Amud Aleph. He says, the only way to allow for this sukkah to take place, the right-angled sukkah, we got 2 walls that are connected at a corner. The only way it could work is if that tefach is built as a tzuras haPesach. What is a tzuras haPesach? So we've learned this before, and of course it's the basics of the halachos of mezuzah, is that if you have 2 doorposts with a piece of wood that lays on top of both of them, then halacha l'maisa, you're obligated to then put up a mezuzah. Rabbi Robinson just shared a picture on the Makor chat recently of someone who had this in their backyard. They built a tzuras HaPesach in their outside back fence. All of a sudden it became chayiv and mezuzah because it had a mashkov. It had the piece of wood on top of the top there. So that's what answer number one is of Rava. Rava says that when we say that, yes, you can use a tefach shochak to make this right angle kosher, it's not a regular tefach. It's that you have to split that tefach into two half tefachs and then make a lintel on top. So that's approach number one as to how to make it kosher, and that's what he says here. Amar Rava, this tefach shochak has to be made into a tzuras hapesach. His second approach, Amar Rava v'niteres nami b'tzuras hapesach. It can also be a tzuras hapesach, namely the third wall can either be a regular tefach shochak, or it could be a tzuras hapesach, but it doesn't have to be a tzuras hapesach alone. It could also be a tefach shochak. That's option two. And option three is Ika de Amre, Amar Rava B'tzricha Nami Tzuras HaPesach, that you need both a tefach and the Tzuras HaPesach, three different approaches for how this third wall, the very short wall of a sukkah, where you have Shtaim Kihilchasan, and the last one is a tefach. That is a big machlokas within Rava. And then here's a story, and we'll find out now how some of the Amoraim after Rava actually held. Says the Gemara, Rav Ashi was one of the later of the Amoraim. We know that he and Ravina, they together organized the Gemara, not as we know it, because before their time, all the Gemaras had were Mishnayos, Brisas, and Memras from Amoraim. But the Shaklavatari that we're familiar with, a lot of the Aramaic that makes the Gemara flow, was not inserted until well after Ravina and Rav Ashi died in a period of time called the Savoraim. But they were the initial editors of the Gemara in its previous iteration. So what does Rav Ashi say? Rav Ashi, Ashkeche the Rav Kahana. He was walking down the street and he saw that Rav Kahana, de ka'avi tefach shochak, v'ka'avi tzuras hapesach. He saw that for his sukkah, he did two things. He had a tefach shochak and he made it tzuras hapesach. So Rav Ashi is like, hey, wait a second. Amar le lo savar mar lahad Rava. Don't you hold like the opinion of Rava? What does Rava say? To Amar Rava, v'niteres nami b'tzuras hapesach, that you can do either or. You can do either a tefach shochak or you could use a tzuras hapesach, but you don't need both. So Rav Kahana, says Rav Ashi, why are you doing what you're doing? Says the Gemara, Amar le, yeah, I know that that's one approach in Rava, but that's not how I hold, says Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana says, Ana ki'idach lishna de Rava svira li. I hold like another version of Rava. What was the version of Rava that he holds? Like to Amar Rava, v'tzricha nami tzuras hapesach, that we need both. Seemingly we don't paskin this way because we hold that you can have two walls and a tefach. But back in the times of the Amoraim, there were two Rav Kahanas. One was earlier, like a 3rd century Amora. This one lived in the 6th century of Amoraim toward the end, because Rava lived in the middle. Couldn't be the 3rd century one quoting Rava because Rava hadn't lived yet. So it had to be the later Rav Kahana. So there's more than one. And this later Rav Kahana held of one of the opinions of Rava that the third wall needed to be both tefach shochak and tzuras hapesach. That brings us to the two dots toward the bottom of the page. The Gemara now is going to make a comparison between the world of Sukkah as it relates to its walls and Shabbos as to whether or not it's enough to carry in a Sukkah if those are the only walls. Let's say you live in Rishus Harabim and you build a Sukkah, Kihil Chasan. It has two walls and the third wall is a tefach. So it's a kosher Sukkah, everyone agrees. But can you carry? Right? They're intersecting halachos. It's not the same thing. Or are they the same thing? So that's what the Gemara is going to be done right now. Almost every time it says Rabba in the next 15 lines, Rava, it's meant to be Rabba over the next 15 lines, as we shall see. Omar Rabba, and he says, V'chein l'Shabbos. Now, it sounds like gentle words, but really what he's saying is that we need to make an extension from the world of Sukkah, where we see that Shtaim Kihilchasan V'shlishi Safilu Tefach, that is not only sufficient to help us fulfill the mitzvah of Sukkah, but it is also the case that it is kosher to carry in that space on Shabbos. Big halacha. Okay, why? Says the Gemara, Migu dahavya dofen le'inyan Sukkah, just like it is a wall as it relates to the halachos of Sukkah, so too says the Gemara, it is a dofen le'inyan Shabbos. It's considered to be the same. A very interesting halacha. So then, says the Gemara as follows. Hold on one second. Are you sure that that's true? Esvei Abaye, do we really say that we compare a Sukkah to Shabbos? That's not so simple. Abaye says, Umi amrinan migu, do we really extend our understanding of how to build a wall for Sukkah to the world of Shabbos to say that you could even carry there on Shabbos? After all, the Gemara says, V'hatanya, the Brisa writes, Dofen, Sukkah kidofen Shabbos. Yes, the Brisa does say that a dofen of a sukkah is like a dofen of Shabbos, and it adds ubilvad yehei shelo yehei. A dofen is a wall. Yeah, sorry. Dofen sukkah, the wall of a sukkah, is similar to the wall of Shabbos. Ubilvad shelo yehei ben kana lechaveru shlosha tvachim. Regular rules of love. But that's not the chiddush of the Mishnah. But the next line is, because this next line of the Mishnah indicates that there's a chumrah by Shabbos that does not apply by sukkah. What is that chumrah? Says the Gemara 8-9 lines from the bottom, 4 lines before the wide lines. The Brisa writes, "V'yisera Shabbos al Sukkah," but there is something extra, something specific and strict about Shabbos, which is not true by Sukkah. What's that? Sheha Shabbos eino niteres ela ba'omed meruba al haparutz. That when it comes to Shabbos, the only way you can carry is if the walls that we're talking about are parutz, are omed meruba al haparutz, is if there's more solid space than open space. But what's the third wall of a sukkah? It's just a tefach. It's halacha l'mosh misinai, a tefach, but that doesn't work for carrying on Shabbos. So Abaye is bothered. Rabbah said, hey, v'chein l'Shabbos. And Abaye is like, what about the Brisa? The Brisa doesn't say what you're saying. The Brisa says that there's a chumrah by Shabbos that doesn't apply by Sukkah, which is that its walls need to be omed meruba al haparutz, that the solid portions of the wall trump the non-solid portions of the wall, namely the halacha l'mosh misinai that we use to shorten the third wall by a Sukkah to say, okay, it only needs to be a tefach. That doesn't apply by Shabbos, because by Shabbos it's omed meruba al haparutz. We need the wall to be 51% solid. Masha'ein came b'Sukkah. So that's my lav, says the Gemara. Isn't it then the case that Yisera Shabbos to Sukkah, Sukkah v'lo amrinon migu? Isn't it then the case that where Shabbos and Sukkot intersect, that Shabbos is really problematic and you can't carry there? That Shabbos of Sukkot is more strict than it would be had it not been Shabbos. So, and therefore we don't say migu. Namely, we don't say that a Sukkah is going to have the same halachos as Shabbos, and Rabbah's wrong. Says the Gemara, lo. No, you misunderstood. And says the Gemara, really, and this is a crazy line in the Gemara. This is crazy. How does the Gemara answer this question? By saying that the halachos of Shabbos change versus when it's Sukkot versus when it's not. Unbelievable. Says the Gemara 5 lines from the bottom. Lo, that you are not correct in your understanding of the Brisa, but rather, what does the Brisa mean when it says that there's something unique about Shabbos? Yisera Shabbos de Alma. Shabbos during the year, a non-Sukkot Shabbos is more strict than Al Shabbos to Sukkah. And Rashi here says explicitly what's going on. I have to read it to you because I'm not going to sound orthodox if I just say it out loud. Rashi says 10, 12 lines from the bottom, Dibur Hamaschil Lo. Hachi Ka'amar. This is pshat in the Gemara. Yisera Hilchos Tiltul Shabbos de Alma. The halachos of tiltul Shabbos, of carrying on Shabbos on a regular Shabbos, are Yisera, they're greater ahilchos tiltul Shabbos de Sukkah than that would be even on a regular Shabbos of Sukkah. She Shabbos de Alma, that year round, when we talk about a regular Shabbos, that when we're talking about a regular Shabbos, it's not Sukkot. 51 Shabbos is out of there. 50 or whatever you get. Sometimes you get 2 Shabbos and Sukkot. For the average non-Sukkot Shabbos, the halacha is that when it comes to carrying, the walls have to be 51% solid. Continues Rashi, the Shabbos to Sukkah. Oh, there we have a different din. Niteres mishum migu. There we employ this halachic extension of migu that since by Sukkot it counts, will even allow it on Shabbos, which is Sukkot. Unbelievable. The halachos of muksa change on one Shabbos a year when Shabbos falls out. Unbelievable. It's a crazy thing. The laws of Shabbos are dependent on anything external. Yes, that's what the Gemara says. You misunderstood the Brisa. And therefore, it's still the case, says the Gemara, v'chein b'Shabbos, that when Shabbos and Sukkah coincide, the Gemara agrees, it acquiesces to this idea that the halachos of Sukkah change on that Shabbos, and you are allowed to carry in that space, even though on another Shabbos you would not have allowed to carry. Very important Rashi that explains this Gemara. Very hard to understand this Gemara without that Rashi. And let's continue. Says the Gemara, okay, I got you. I understand. You got a mechudesh answer here. Ihachi. If it's true, though, that there are differences between one Shabbos and the next and one Sukkah and the next, so then Ihachi, why don't we expressly write the following? Listening Nami, we should teach that there's also a chumrah by Sukkah, that you say Sukkah de Alma, Sukkah de Shabbos, that there's something more strict about Sukkah than there is about Shabbos. What's that? Says the Gemara, De'ilu Sukkah de Alma, that normally when we talk about a Sukkah during the year, what would we say? Boya tefach shochak, that fourth wall needs to be made out of a solid material that's a tefach shochak, let's call it 4 inches of wall. But the ilu sukkah de Shabbos, but when Shabbos and Sukkah intersect and Sukkahs intersect, so then we have a kula, that this Sukkah de Shabbos is lo boya tefach shochak v'sagi belechi. You only need a lechi, the little tiny rope. We have one in our parking lot. For those who don't use the Eruv, you can carry in our parking lot. Walk outside of the parking lot. When you get down right to the corner by the grass and by the parking lot, look up the pole. There's a lechi at the bottom, string running across the top to the Mashiach's house. Thank you to the Mashiachs for allowing us to do that. And that rope allows people who don't use the city Eruv to carry in that space. You can't even see it. It's less than a tefach shochak. So says the Gemara, that's a kula. That's a kula. Sukkah is more chamor in that you require a tefach shochak, you require 4 inches of material. But on Shabbos, it's a kula. So why didn't you say that? So says the Gemara, you don't need to. But let's first finish the question because I didn't finish the question yet. Says the Gemara, you yourself, you said that if you put schach on top of a mavui that has a lechi, that it's kosher. So we know that in fact this is the din. So why did this brisa only stipulate the uniqueness of Shabbos and not also stipulate the uniqueness of Sukkot? The uniqueness of Shabbos was that the halacha changes from muksa on Shabbos, which is Sukkot. And the uniqueness of Sukkah is that when it comes to Shabbos, you're allowed to make a Sukkah out of a lechi and a korah on that last wall. Why wasn't it stated? So says the Gemara, you didn't need to. 2 lines from the bottom, Zayin and Aleph. Hahu lo itzrich. We don't need to add that because Hashta, now that the following has taken place, Mikilta lechamirta amrinan, now that we've learned from the more lenient to the more strict, namely from Sukkot to Shabbos, therefore mechamirta lekilta lekol shekain, then all the more so we should be learning from Shabbos to Sukkot. We should be bringing something over the bridge. And what we're bringing over the bridge is this leniency of being able to build out that third wall of a sukkah with even only a lechi. And that is why it wasn't stipulated. So this last section of the Gemara, the bottom quarter of the page from the 2 dots, we dealt with this question of whether or not things change when Shabbos and Sukkot intersect, and the chiddush of the Gemara is yes, they do in fact change. The halachos of muksa are different, and as well, just 1 second, and as well that third wall on Shabbos can be made out of a lechi, and it doesn't need to be a tefach shochak. Yes, Gerald.
What's the lechi? What's the case of the lechi?
So a lechi is that you have 2 regular walls, and for the third wall, instead of putting up a piece of wood that's tefach shochak, that's 4 inches wide, you put a very thin piece of something underneath on the edge of the wall, and then you run a string across the top to the other side. That would be a lechi in this case.
Okay, so
that's a big kula. That's more mekel than we would have on a regular sukkah during the year. But when it coincides with Shabbos, we allow for the leniency.
How is that halacha from Shabbos going to Sukkah?
Shabbos going into Sukkah is that we change the halachos of muktzah. Because on a regular Shabbos, which isn't Sukkah, then we say that wall would have to be 51% solid. But by Sukkah, during a non-Shabbos, we would have said that we have the halacha l'mosh misina, you only need a tefach. But that doesn't work for Hilchos Muktzah. So then we're mekil on Shabbos, which is Sukkah, to say that fourth wall, you're right, the fourth wall doesn't have to be omen merubal parts. It could even be only a tefach shochak, which is a very big chiddush. So then says the Gemara, the very last.
Isn't Sukkah only kosher on Shabbos?
It seems that way from the Gemara. I'm not poskening shilos, but it seems that way from the Gemara. It does. Not so simple to say that, because I could also see how the Gemara could have explained it the other way. But the way the Gemara just said it at the end is that we learn mechamirta lekilta, that seemingly it's still Shabbos coincided with. Again, I could see another path, but that's what it seems to me. Last few words. Gufa. Gufa always means that we're reanalyzing something that we just read. Omar Rabba. Rabba says, turning to the top of Zayin and Beis, we just quoted this line a couple of lines ago, that Sikech al gabe mavui sheyesh lo lechi kshera. We said that if there is a sukkah that has as one of its walls a lechi, just a string running across the top, that it's kosher. And another comment of Rabba, and we're going to question why we need both. The Omar Rabba, he also said, Sikech al gabe pase biros kshera. Remember the case of pase biros. You can look in Rashi. Rashi has indicated this. You have 4 right-angled corners. They're not touching one another, and there's more open space than closed space. What does Rabbah say about that? That sikech al gabe pase biros kshera. That if you find a way to put schach on top of them, the halacha is that it's kosher. Those 2 cases are pretty similar. You have a mavui, 2 walls opposite one another, schach on top kosher. You have the pase biros, the picture in Rashi, 4 right-angled corners with a lot of space in the middle, schach on top kosher. Why do we need both cases? Says the Gemara, vitzricha, we need both of them. Te'iyashminan mavui, if I only had the case of the mavui, where the walls were opposite one another and we put schach on top, then that is because mishum de'ikashtei defanos ma'al yasa. At least there, relative to the pasebi rows, which is only corners, at least with the mavui, each of the walls that are there, granted they're not connected, but at least they're real walls. They're not halachic walls, they're real walls. And I might have thought that only there would that be the case. But by the case of the four corner pieces where there is no real wall, I might have thought we should not say that that's a kosher sukkah. Amalo, I might have thought not. Therefore, I needed the case of the pasebi rows. V'i, says the Gemara, v'iyashmin and pasebi rows. And I only had the case of pasebi rows, where the four corner pieces are there, again, as indicated in the picture in Rashi. So I might have thought that over there, mishum de'ika shem arba defanos. At least there, halachically, the chalos shem, they're halachically walls, even though they don't look like walls, but halachically they're walls. So maybe because they have a shame of a wall, 4 walls, that's better than the mavui, because aval sikech al gabe mavui deleka shem arba defanos. There, the mavui only has 2 walls. I might have thought the pasebi rows are better, so only that sukkah would be kosher. And maybe amalo, I might have thought that the case of mavui is not that way.
What's the case of mavui? I don't know.
2 walls opposite one another, schach on top.
So in Sukkah Shabbos, that's kosher?
Yeah, maybe even as we were discussing, maybe even during regular, but certainly on Shabbos it's kosher with a lechi and a korah. With a lechi, yeah.
Because why? What's the case? Why do you matter it on Sukkahs? Why do we matter it on Shabbos Sukkahs?
On Shabbos Sukkahs, there's a chiddush, because on Shabbos we allow a person to carry in a mavui with even only a rope at the top. But during a regular sukkah, we don't. It has to be a tefach, not a rope. It has to be a tefach. So it's a chiddush. It's a big chiddush. So that's what the Gemara says. And one last part of this structure of the Gemara, which is, okay, you've explained why we need the case of mavui, and you've explained why we need the case of pasebi rows. V'yashmin and hani tarte. Had I taught this, but not Rabba's initial din that we started with toward the bottom of the page, that Sukkahs and Shabbos that coincide, v'chein the Shabbos, that they're similar. So says the Gemara, then I might have thought that only mechamirta lekilta, I can only learn from Shabbos to Sukkahs. Aval, I might have thought that mikilta lechamirta, that from Sukkah to Shabbos I could not learn amalo. Therefore, tzricha, Rabba needed to say all 3 of these particular lines, and that is how the Gemara explains this sugya. We're going to be moving on to a new sugya now, which will take us to the bottom of this page. And then for Daf Ches Amud Aleph, we're going to be learning some geometry, a little bit of math. It's going to be fun. Let's get started. We're about 10 lines down. The Gemara says, quoting from our Mishnah, that if the sunshine that's cutting through the schach is more than the shade, so let's call it 51% sun, 49% shade. In such a case, the halacha is that the sukkah is psula. But there's a machlokas tanaim about this. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, Chamsa machmas sikuch, velo machmas tefanos. When we're measuring our 51% of sunlight, says the Tanakama, we only measure sunlight that peers through the schach, but not sunlight that peers through the walls. Let's say that your walls were made of lavud. Every 2.5 tfachim, you have another post. There's a lot of sunlight coming through, right? So says the Gemara, we ignore the sunlight from the wall. We only measure the sunlight from the schach. V'lo machmas tefanos. We ignore the sunlight that comes through the walls. However, crazy. Rabbi Yoshia Omer, he says, no, you're wrong. Af machmas tefanos. We even measure the sunlight that's coming through the walls. So the sukkah that I build in my house, there's a small, there's a wood beam, and we use tarp, but there's like 2-3 inches but between the wood and the tarp where there's like a taut stretch between the things that hook the tarp onto the wood. So what tips the scales? My schach is 49% covered, but 2% more sunlight comes in underneath the beam at the side. So Rav Yoshia says, you're done. Your sukkah's puzzle. Why does he hold that? Why would he say that sunlight that comes through the walls counts as part of the sunlight? So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yemar bar Shalamya mishmei Abaye, my time with the Rav Yoshia. Why would he include? Everyone knows that a sukkah is because of the schach. Why would you include chamsa merubah min silsa, sun that comes through the walls? That doesn't even sound right. Says the Gemara, because of a pasuk. The pasuk says, Visakosa al ha'aron es ha-paroches, not to be confused with the kapores. The kapores was physically laid directly on top of the aron. The paroches is a separate din. The paroches we learned about in Maseches Yoma extensively, where there are two parochos and he would go up one and back the other. These hung from the ceiling. They were very long and very expensive. We said I think they were 28 thread. Who remembers? I don't remember. 24 thread or 28 thread? I think 28 thread. It was a lot. Very thick, very heavy. Okay, so says the Gemara, how does Rav Yoshia know that the walls count as sunlight? From this pasuk that it says that we're supposed to hang the paroches to block the aron. And what does the pasuk say? V'sakosa al ha'aron esakaporos. What does it call it? The aron? What does it call the paroches? I mean, v'sakosa schach. Says the Gemara, paroches mechitzahi. Everyone agrees that the paroches is a separation. It separates the kodesh hakodashim from the rest of the heichal, and at the same time, the kakarya rachmana sechacha. So we see that the wall has a shem schach. So Rav Yoshia says you have to include the sunlight that's peering through the walls because the wall has a shem schach. It's brilliant. Great answer. Great answer. Says the Gemara, Alma, we treat the wall the same way we treat the schach. And therefore, when we're measuring how much sunlight is breaking through the schach, we also have to measure how much sunlight is breaking through the walls. And therefore, if your walls are made in such a way where a lot of sunlight can get through, you're probably in bad shape because your sukkah will be puzzled according to this version of the Gemara. Oh, V'Rabbanan. The Tanakama, you said that the walls don't count, that if sunlight comes through the walls, it doesn't count as part of the measure of Chamsa, Merubim, and Silsa, of sunlight versus shade. Says the Gemara, what did the Rabbanan do with the Pasuk? It's a Pasuk in Chumash. And the Pasuk is clear that that's the case, that we refer to it as a Mechitza and it's called Schach. So answer the Rabbanan, Hahu de nekuf beporta de mechse schach. No, they say something a little bit different. They say that the Schach has to sit in such a way where it's like an L shape. Like at the top, it's kind of over the aron, and then the paroches comes down. It doesn't hang straight, right? We have like right here, it hangs on hooks, it hangs on, and it runs across it. No, the paroches in the Beis HaMikdash, according to the sheets of the Rabbanon, let's say the aron was over here. This is the Kodesh HaKodashim. So the paroches starts here, kicks out, and then draws down, and it's like schach. That's why the pasuk said v'sakosa, because it's a shame schach. Not because we should look at the walls as schach to measure sunlight, but because when the paroches was above the aron, it was actually literally above the aron like schach, and that's how they read the pasuk, so they get out of this problem. And he says it is hanging over the aron in a way where it looks like schach. Now, Amar Abaye. The Gemara is shifting a little bit, but we'll see that it's connected momentarily. We're almost halfway down on Zayin Amud Beis. Abaye says, Rebbe, V'Rabbi Yoshia, V'Rabbi Huda, V'Rabbi Shimon, V'Rabban Gamaliel, V'Beis Shammai, V'Rabbi Eliezer, V'Acherim. All of these Tanaim, remember Abaye is an Amora, all the rest of these people are Tanaim. All of them are of the opinion, Kulhu Svira Lahu, Sukkah Diras Keva Bo'inan, that there needs to be an element of the Sukkah that's Diras Keva. This is such a contradiction to what we're so used to hearing about Sukkah, which is that it specifically has to be Diras Harai. It has to be temporary, even though we say that it has to be Teishu Kain Taduru. It has to be a place that you would like treat it as your home. But it has to be Arai. You can't leave your Sukkah up all year round. So what the Gemara means here, and Rashi says as much, is that Rashi says immediately to our left, halfway down, Dibra Maschel, Diras Keva, Re'uya l'hishtamish kavua v'nires kavais, has to have an appearance of that which is kavua, even though, yes, you're right, it's absolutely temporary. And we're going to go through very briefly a collection of Mari Makomos for each of these Tanaim, how they each felt that this idea of Kviyus had to be for the Sukkah. Rebbe, the opinion of Rebbe was, we're right halfway down Zayin Amud Beis, he wrote in the Brisa, the Tanya, Rebbe Omer, Kol Sukkah she'ein ba'arba amos al arba amos psula. What does that indicate? What's 4x4? That's house measurements. That was what we started with the other day. We tried to ask in Lumdus, does Rebbe say that a sukkah is mamish like a house, arba al arba? Okay, maybe to some degree that's what Rebbe meant. That's what the Gemara is saying here is that to say Rosh Baruba v'Shulchanu, he's like, no, it has to have a kviyas to it, has to be 4x4. Rav Yoshia, Hade Amran. Oh, beautiful line. Rav Yoshia, how do we know that he knows that there has to be a kviyas? Because he says, look at the walls. The walls have to be full. The sun should not be coming through the walls. That's Rabbi Yoshia Hada Amran, like we said. Rabbi Huda, what does Rabbi Huda say? That's our Mishnah on Daf Beis. Tetnan, sukkah shigvol amal mikaf ama psula. What does Rabbi Huda say? Machshir. It's okay to have a sukkah that's 20 amos plus tall because it has to have an element of kviyas. It has to look like a real house. Rabbi Shimon, what does he hold? We saw this already as well. This is like a great summary. The Tanya, Beis Kilchasan V'Gimel Afilu Tefach. The Tanakama was of the opinion that the minimum sukkah is 2 full walls and 1 short wall. Reb Shimon says no. Omer Gimel Kilchasan V'Dalet Afilu Tefach, more like a house that has 4 walls. Houses have 4 walls. We're in a building now that has 4 walls because that's normal when you live somewhere. So says the Gemara. That's the sample of Reb Shimon. What about Rabban Gamliel? The Tanya, the Brisa writes, Ha'osa Sukkah Barosha Ha'agala or Barosha Svina. You make your sukkah on top of an animal. You make it on at the tip of a boat. No, Rabban Gamliel Posel. That's not where people live. That's not enough kvias. Next, Rabbi Akiva Machshir. Rabbi Akiva argues on Rabban Gamliel, but Rabban Gamliel is the one who says that doesn't count. So that shows a higher level of kvias. Beis Shammai says it's not. We learned this too. Mishahaya rosha v'ruba b'sukkah v'shulchana b'socha bayis. That if a person only has room in the sukkah for rosha v'ruba for himself, for most of his body, but the table's inside, Beis Shammai posel v'sel machshir. Beis Shammai says no, it's not enough. It has to be more b'kvias. And then the Gemara goes to next, Rabbi Eliezer. What does he say? If you make like a teepee shape, or if you lean it up against a house such that there's no roof, Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Eliezer says no, not similar enough to a house, not a high enough level of kviyas. Therefore, done, doesn't count. Last shita, acherim, always a reference to some, either a collection of or a particular person, depends on the context of certain Tanaim. The Tanya, what does the Brisa write? Acherim omrim. Sukkah ha'asuya kishovach psula lefi she'ein lo zavios. A sukkah that's made like a shovach, that's made like a chicken coop, and they were typically made in some type of shape like a cylinder. It was not kosher lefi she'ein lo zavios because there are no corners. Okay, math people, let's get started. We're going to now talk a little bit about circles. I'll be sharing a little bit of math and some pictures. I'm not an artist, but we'll get there. Just wait. I didn't get there yet, and you'll guide me if I butcher this. Says the Gemara, 8 lines from the bottom, Zayin Amud Beis. Amar Rav Yochanan, Sukkah asuya kikivshan. If a sukkah is made like a kivshan, like their version of an oven, which was always cylindrical, im yesh behekefa, if at its circumference, kidei liyashev b'kaf daled b'nei adam k'sheira. Rav Yochanan says, if you look at the circle that's listed here in the Gemara, there needs to be space for 24 people to sit at that circle. And if the circle is that big, that's large, 24 people. If the sukkah is that big, then the sukkah is kshera, even if it's a circle. Okay, just you have to think, it's circumference. How many people can sit around? So could you imagine 24 people sitting around? That's a sukkah that's almost the size of this room. It's pretty big. Okay, so let's get into this.
It doesn't say anything about table. It says
no. It says behekefa. You're sitting at the circumference.
Inside or on the outside?
Great question. We'll get to that a little bit later in the Gemara. Great question. We'll get to that a little bit later.
24 people in a tiny little thing just cram out.
No, it's sitting in a circumference. It's not jamming them in. Yeah, we'll have to see where you're sitting them. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Great question to Gerald and to Michael. Let's go. And v'im lav, says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom. V'im lav psula. If it cannot hold that number of people sitting around the sukkah, so then the halacha is that it's pasul. Kiman. Whose opinion is this like? So says the Gemara, this is Kerebi, like we've already seen now for the 3rd time. The Amar kol sukkah she'ein ba arba amos al arba amos psula. He says because a sukkah has to be 4 by 4. So says the Gemara, 4 by 4. 4 by 4. Let's talk in English terms. We'll talk in our metrics. It's a 6-foot square sukkah. Okay, let's call it 8 feet according to the Chazon Ish. That's very, very large. Okay, 8 feet. This is a 6-foot table. That's not that big. Okay, and then you have to draw a circle around it. It's pretty big for the room. 24 people have to sit around. It says, hold on one second. Michti, we need to analyze this. First of all, Gavra ba'am sayasiv. The average person takes up approximately an amma, okay, 1.5 feet of space. And not only that, let's talk a little bit of basic math. V'chol sheyesh behekefo shlosha tfachim, yesh bo rochav tefach. Anything that has in its circumference 3 will have as its diameter 1. So let's say that we're talking about a sukkah of 4. This picture is flawed because the sukkah is not a line across the middle. It needs to be a square within a circle. The Gemara is going to ask that question. But if you have a circle and the circumference of the circle is in a unit of 3, then the diameter by definition has to be 1. This is pi, 3.14, right? This is how we know. The Gemara in Bava Kama figures this out when they try to fit the Sefer Torah, which was on 1 scroll, into the Aron Bris Hashem. How do they fit it in? And Tosfos there points out it was a little bit more than 3. Okay, so that's this Gemara. This is an approximation, of course, because it's not exactly 3. We know it's 3.14, however. Some math genius. No, you just got me to the end. I think maybe 2 more decimals, 3.1415. I'm done. That's it. I don't know anymore. But that's what the Gemara says here, that some genius, math genius, did it to like 20,000 decimal points. Okay, it's not any of us, I don't imagine. Maybe it is. I don't know. So, What?
These homeless living on the streets.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's go.
Can't have a job. Can't have a job with that. It's one episode on Smithsonian geniuses, and you're done. So says the Gemara, I don't understand your sheets of 24 people. If every person takes up 1 amma in width, and if it's true that the circumference is going to be 3 times the diameter, so then betresar sagi. So then if the middle is 4, so 4 times 3 is 12 amos on the outside. Well, if there's 12 amos on the outside, that's 12 people. Rabbi Yochanan, you said 24 people. That's a whole different ballgame. So says the Gemara, hold on one second. Hani mili, when do we say the ratio of 3 to 1, that the circumference is going to be 3 or 3.14 when the diameter is 1? That's only true in a circle. Aval beribua bayatfe. But had it been a square, we know that, think about it, 4 squared is 4 sides, so 16 amos around, so that's more people. Says Gemara, still, bad answer. Michti, hold on one second. Kama meruba yoser al ha'igol. What is the size difference between a meruba, a square, and an eagle, a circle? Says Gemara, revia, in that if a square had an area of 16, then the circle would be 12. So the Gemara says that if it's going to be a square, it's b'shisar, 4 times 4, is going to be 16. So says the Gemara, very good. That's a good point. It says the Gemara, Hani mili bi'igula denafik ribua. That's true of a circle that's inside a square. But aval ribua denafik migo igula. But where you have a square that's inside a circle, so there's much more wasted space of a circle that has a square in it than a square that's inside a circle. Did I say that right? I think so. Yep. Yes. Okay. If you look at the 2 pictures that are here, there's a lot more wasted space in the circle that surrounds a square, because everything at the very sides is that large semicircle crescent shape. It's just not true in the reverse, where the square is on the outside of the circle, that only the corners are there, because as the Gemara now indicates, 5th line, bayatfei mishum morsha de karnasa, because the corners are a little harder to hit. So when you're drawing the circle around the square and you have to make sure that you're outside of the corners, there's a lot more wasted space. As the Gemara still, michti, kol amsa beribua, you're still making another error, says the Gemara. When you have a square amma, then amsa utrei chumshe ba'alachsona. This is basic math. This green triangle here, let's assume that it's a perfect triangle. We would call a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So the math equation that we would know is as follows. If this is 45 degrees and this is 45 and this is 90, then by definition, this is the mathematical formula. If this is a unit of 1, then the hypotenuse is x times the square root of 2. Square root of 2 is 1.4. So that means that if this is 1, then this is 1.4. But if your sukkah is 4, then what's the middle? 5.6, right? Your hypotenuse. So that's why if you have a circle, if you have a...
Hey Siri, what's the square root?
If you have a circle that's surrounding a square, and you know what one of the walls, it's a square. If you know what this is, then you know the hypotenuse is, you know exactly what it's going to be. So if you have a square, let's take a look at this picture in our Gemara. You have a square inside a circle, and you know that the sukkah is 4 by 4. Then if you have a square inside a circle, second picture. If you have a square inside a circle, and that's our kosher sukkah according to Rebbe, which is 4 by 4. So x times the square root of 2 is not only the angle from corner to corner of the square, it's also the hypotenuse of the whole circle. So therefore, when you have a square inside a circle, the diameter of the whole circle is x times the square root of 2, 4 times the square root of 2, which is 5.6. So now that we know what the diameter is, 5.6, what's the circumference? Multiply by 3. Right? Because that's the equation we started with, 1-to-3 ratio. So if our diameter here, if our hypotenuse is going to be 5.6, so then 5.6 times 3 is 15, 16.8. Let's see what the Gemara says here. Michti, says the Gemara, if it's in fact true, as we know from our math, that kol amsa beribua, that when you have a square, that the hypotenuse, the angle in the middle is amsa utrei chumshe be'alachsona, is 1 2/5, also called 1.4. So then if that's true, then you know that the diameter of your circle is going to be 5.6. And if you know that the diameter of your circle is 5.6 and you multiply by 3 to get the circumference, what are you going to see? You're going to see it's going to be b'shivsar nechei chumsha sagya. Then it'll be 17 minus 1/5. 16.8. Same exact math that we just did because we got it from the Gemara. So says the Gemara, Rav Yochanan, you said 24 people need to sit around. No. If the minimum shiur of a sukkah is like Rebbe said, that it's 4 by 4, and that 4 by 4 is surrounded by a circle. And we know that the diameter of that circle is x times the square root of 2, 4 times the square root of 2, which is 5.6. Therefore, the circumference is 16.8 and not 24. Rav Yochanan, what are you talking about? Great question of the Gemara. Says the Gemara, oh, don't worry about it. I got a great response. Lo duck. He was being inexact. He was being inexact. 24 to 16.8 is not called inexact. That's called a 50% margin of error. When you're like in a research study, like within a margin of 50% error, 50% of people do the following bad thing. That's completely useless. It says the Gemara, what are you talking about? Amor de amrinan lo dak purta. Where can I say that you're off a little bit when it's a little bit? You're saying lo dak, he was being inexact. Fine, give me a couple of decimal points. But this is ridiculous. Tuva, mi amrinan lo dak, with such a large margin of error. You're going to say he was being inexact? So answers the Gemara halfway down in Ches Med Aleph. Amar le markshisha breder Rav Chizda le Rav Ashi misavris gavra ve'amsa yosif. Do we really say that the width of a person is in fact an amma? Going back to one of our starting assumptions, to one of our givens, we said that the width of a person is approximately an amma. It's not. Tilsa gavre betarte amsa yasve. Really, it's that 3 people fit in a space of 2 amos, which makes every person 2/3 of an amma. And when you do the math of 24 people times 2/3, that number is extremely close to our 16.8. It's 16. So says the Gemara, therefore we have our number because kama havaluhu shisar, that's 16. And what did Rabbi Yochanan end up saying? Well, 16.8, lo duck. That's our understanding. Anan shivsar nechei chumsha ba'inan, lo duck. So he said really the width of the person is 2/3 of an amma, and 24 times 2/3 of an amma is 16. And the math that we did based on all of the x times the square root of 2 ended up being 16. Okay, there you can say lo duck. Plus or minus 1. You're off by 0.8. Good. Fine answer. Says the Gemara, it's not a fine answer. Because when you make an approximation on the smaller end, what happens to your sukkah? It's not kosher anymore. If you say that the hypotenuse is exactly 5.6, then you have a kosher sukkah. Any less, your sukkah is not 4 by 4, according to Rebbe, your sukkah is not kosher. You want to approximate? Great. Approximate on the other side of the number. Don't approximate on the short side. If you ballpark whatever the circumference is 16, you don't have a kosher sukkah anymore, says the Gemara. What are you talking about? Amor damrinan lo dak lechumra. I could understand what you're saying, that he's approximating. If the approximation ensures that you're yotzei the mitzvah, tell me 18. Don't tell me 16. But lekula mi amrinan lo dak, to the point that you say that you might have a non-kosher sukkah, you messed up. It's not acceptable. So therefore, says the Gemara, you're right. Omar le Rav Asi le Rav Ashi leolam gavra ba'amsa yosif. Really, no, we're going back to our starting point, what we started with, that the width of a person is 1 amma. The Rav Yochanan makom gavra lo kachashiv. Rav Yochanan wasn't really discussing the actual space of the person. They're going to be sitting in a different place, as we will see. And kama havalahu, it's tam nesre. So let's do the math here. And the Gemara here is making a gentle approximation, which is that the hypotenuse is actually 6, not 5.6. The Gemara is making 6. And then what's the circumference? It's going to be 18, because 1-to-3 ratio. So now we have 18. If you would then add the people who are 1 amma each, so instead of it being 6, it's now 8, because 6 plus a row of 1 amma people, which widens it by 2, is 8. That's 24 amos of people sitting around. So that's how the Gemara answers this question. Tam Nesrei, really it's 18. And b'shivsar nechei chumsha sagya, really technically speaking, it should have been 16.8. You're right. Hainu de lo duck ulechumra lo duck. And that is exactly what the Gemara meant when it said that we were being inexact. The real number, the MS math number, is that the hypotenuse, the angle, the diameter of our circle needs to be 16.8 at its minimum. We got to the number of 18 by reinterpreting how Rav Yochanan defined the person. Are the people in the count or are they not in the count? So when you take the 24 men and they're not in the count, so then you're talking about 6 across the circle, which makes the whole circumference 18. Then when you add the people, it's not 6 wide, it's 8 wide. 8 times 3 is 24. All the math works out kaftor b'ferach. And that's what the Gemara says, hainu lo dak, uluchumra lo dak, that you're allowed to be approximate when you're on the chumrah side. You're above 16.8, 18, great. And you're not going to mess up. Your sukkah is going to be kosher. One last nakuda for the night as we wrap up to the top of Ches Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Rabbanan de Kesari, the rabbis of Kesar, be'amrei la. Some say dayane de Kesari, not just the rabbis, but the dayanim. Amrei, they said something that was difficult to understand. Igula de nafik migo ribua, riva. They said that if there's an igula, a circle that's inside of a ribua, the circle is going to be 25% less than the square. And on top of Daf Ches Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Ribua, the nafik migo igula palga, that if you have a square that's inside a circle, then it's a 50% difference. The Gemara says, no, it's not. And mathematically also, no, it's not. Velohi, dakachazinan, delo havakulehai. We're just looking at the math. You can measure it however you want, do all the equations you want. It's not going to end up being 50% more, which is palga. And the Gemara therefore rejects this shita of the Rabbanan of the Kesari. We're going to stop right here on Ches Amud Beis. Tomorrow night we will start with Ches Amud Beis here at the top, and Emir Hashem learn all of Daf Tes. That will bring us up to speed with Tisha B'Av. But that also means we're going to be a blot ahead tomorrow and on Shabbos, and then we'll be all caught up. No Daf Yomi in person on Tisha B'Av, and then after that we'll pick up again, of course, on Monday night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.